organizing this very interesting topic at this very interesting times. This presentation or this conference, which we are having virtually, aims to produce a guideline or a blueprint that a new government can use once a democratic Eritrea emerges, the Eritrea that we are all looking for comes to reality. This conference is, the aim of this conference is also to consider papers by expert groups and to find where the gaps are and try to discuss how to fill them, to see where the errors are and take some remedies to mend them. What the actual conference, the expert groups need, sorry. What needs to be done to ensure more effective advocacy and lobbying with existing democratic governments and institutions, both before democracy arrives in Eritrea and afterwards. This session will also look at how best we can, as opposition groups, engage with pertinent decision makers. What lessons can we learn from the advocacy efforts to date on behalf of Eritreans in 3 countries, the United Kingdom, the USA, and Israel, where that advocacy has robust. So I will leave now the floor to Mike, but before that, I would like to introduce myself, which I should have done first. My name is Sarah Ogbe, and I live in the United Kingdom in Manchester. I am an academic by profession. Like many of you, I have arrived into the diaspora as a refugee, an unwilling refugee, and I work for the University of Manchester, the British Council at the moment, but I had worked also for the University of Asmara for about 27 years. So this is me, and I'm really, really interested in this topic of transition, in discussing transition, because I'm a member also of Senate movement, which focuses on transition times. Transition is very important for all of us because it is a time when, which we need to be careful. It is a time that we should be very, very careful not to repeat the mistakes that we had already made. Had we been very careful and had we looked into many directions just after liberation, I don't think we would be here. So this engaging with democracies and these transition times, it is very, very important, and I'm grateful that to Focus Eritrea for organizing this. Now I'm going to leave the floor to Mike Slosnik. Mike, the floor is yours.
Mike, are you there? Oh.
He's still muted, Paulos. There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
You have
Good.
to unmute it yourself. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Sarah, for that introduction and for moderating this discussion. And a big, big thank you to Habti for his extraordinary work in assembling this conference, and also for structuring this working group, and himself for advocating for a free and democratic Eritrea. I'm happy to say that we'll hear from Habti on the detail of his own advocacy in a few minutes. As Sarah said, we're going to be talking about two things today. How to advocate with existing democracies and related institutions to help Eritrea and Eritrean refugees right now, today, before Eritrea has opened at all to democracy. And second, how to advocate after Eritrea begins to open toward democracy. The advocacy topics will differ as between those two projects, but the advocacy methods will be largely the same. We'll spend most of our time today talking about what we advocate for now and how we do it. Later, we'll talk about how we can apply all of that when the great days of freedom in Eritrea finally arrive. We're fortunate to have on our panel today 6 people who have toiled hard in this vineyard. Habti Hagos and Jack Patterson from Eritrea Focus in the UK. Sigal Rosen and Geber Hiwat, known as Gary Mellis, from Hotline for Migrants and Refugees, known by its acronym HRM in Israel, HRM. John Stauffer and myself from the America Team for Displaced Eritreans. The 3 organizations, I think, have achieved significant things in their respective countries. No, we haven't brought democracy to Eritrea. No, we haven't found safety for all of the thousands of Eritrean refugees who need it, even in their own, in our own respective countries, let alone elsewhere in the world. But we believe we've made progress in engaging our governments in the issues and in raising awareness within the general public. We have far to go, and as we'll discuss, we'll try to move forward in that. But we've made a start, and we'd like to share with you what we've done and to learn from you how you believe we can go forward together. The premise of this presentation is that while it's good for Eritrean expats living in existing democracies to talk to one another about these things, it's not good enough. To not also engage with governments and other institutions within existing democracies would be to miss a huge opportunity. We'll be discussing the details of that, but let me say very simply from the outset, if there's one takeaway we hope everyone has from this session, it's this: just do it. Talk to your government. Just do it. Talk to your government. The second message would be that each of the organizations presenting today was invented out of nothing by someone at some point in time and out of unique circumstances. No one was handed a plan, and there was no single path. There was only a perceived need to do something and the will to do it. And come the opening of Eritrea, the needs and opportunities will be ever greater for expats to raise their voices within existing democracies to help Eritrea achieve enduring freedom and prosperity. So as you listen to this presentation, I'd invite you, each of you, to ask yourself, as to engaging with democratic governments, what can I do in one or more of these areas? Not the guy or the woman next to me, not next month or next year, but what's stopping me from participating right now? So now an overview of the genesis and the work of the 3 organizations. Our presentation paper, and please read it, it was sent around on the 23rd, I believe, of June. Read it if you can. It lists some of each organization's principal achievements. As you'll also see there, they've engaged in 3 main types of activities. 1, I'm going to hold up my fingers. 1, advocating for democracy and human rights in Eritrea. 2, advocating for the protection of refugees and asylum seekers in diaspora. 3, litigating some of the pertinent issues in court. Each of the three organizations principally does two of those three things. To my understanding, none of them to date has done much of all three. To help you make sense of all that and about what you're about to hear, you can think of it this way, and jot this down if you like. Eritrea Focus in the UK and the America team in the US advocate for human rights and democracy and democratization in Eritrea. HRM in Israel and the America team in the US do refugee protection. Eritrea Focus in the UK and HRM in Israel do litigation. Our hope for today's presentation is that the panelists will engage in a lively discussion about their respective goals, accomplishments, and challenges in dealing with governments and other institutions, that they'll compare notes with one another for the benefit of the audience, and that the audience will then join in the discourse. I also think it can be instructive for all of us to consider how each of the three organizations came to exist and how each happened upon its particular path. Why this direction and not another direction? Some of the work developed out of pre-existing activities that the organizations had, some out of demographic shifts, some out of pure happenstance. Considering all of that may give our audience ideas on devising their own path going forward. I shouldn't say audience, I should say our group. We're all doing this together. So let's take the organizations one at a time. HRM in Israel first. As you know, Israel had a large influx of African migrants, mainly from Eritrea and Sudan, starting about 13 or 14 years ago. The migrants were initially tolerated, but as is so often the case with migrations anywhere, with their growing numbers in Israel, they lost their welcome and they came to face popular and governmental hostility and the threat of removal. Israel's citizens, like every country's, are a mix, of course. In the aggregate, Israel occupies a unique psychological and ideological territory, I think, of being a haven for refugees, but mainly for a certain sectarian type of refugees. Very deep in the nation's character has been both an empathy for the world's mistreated peoples and an urge to protect the identity and security of its own people. It's a poignant and difficult tension. So, when the African migrants came to Israel, HRM had already been helping migrants and guest workers of multiple nationalities there, and it was positioned to step up. And they've done that. They've now made a mission of protecting African asylum seekers in Israel. Number two, Eritrea Focus. The UK's Eritrean population appears to enjoy a considerable concentration of numbers and energy in London. Some or many of London's Eritreans over the years have found themselves well established within the country's professional life. Some or many have become advocates for Eritrea's freedom. With the arrival of large numbers of Eritreans on the continent and in the UK in recent years, the British government and the British people became amply aware of Eritrea's plight. Through circumstances and good fortune, not the least of which included connecting with several passionately engaged friends in Parliament, Eritrea Focus was able to take that well of energy and talent and turn it into what has become a robust advocacy movement. Third, the America team in the US. Now here's an example of true happenstance. In the US, the controversy and energy around immigration issues is focused largely on Latin Americans seeking to enter from our southern border with Mexico. The Middle East is another focal point about human rights and immigration issues, but concern for African issues is generally dim. Nevertheless, something happened for Eritreans. In the 1960s, as a young man, our president, John Stauffer, served for 2 years as a volunteer with the U.S. Peace Corps. John, wave. Wave to everyone, John. There it is. 35 years later, John was approached by one of his former students who had come to the U.S. as a grown man and was applying for asylum here, and who now taught John about the severe repression in Eritrea. Together, they formed a precursor to the America team, and the work of the organization has continued since then. I think in all of that, across the three countries lies a question. When contemplating engaging with a democratic government, what's been the need? What have been our resources? What's been the opportunity, and how do we seize it? We can all think about that as the panelists describe their work, and we can discuss it later as a group. Well, thanks for that opportunity, and I'd like to now give you Hapti Hagos, an exceptional gentleman and the convener of this conference, together with his colleague Jack Patterson, to discuss the work of Eritrea Focus in the UK. Hapti and Jack.
Thank you, Mike. Can I ask Jack to start, and then I will follow up Jack's talk, if I may. Is that okay, Jack?
Of course. I'm going to have to start, unfortunately, with an apology. One of the problems with these virtual conferences is the internet, and unfortunately mine has stopped working today. It's entirely possible that an engineer will turn up midway through my speech. So if that does happen, I'll have to apologize in advance. So everyone here is in their own way an expert on advocacy, particularly in relation to Eritrea. Rather than preach to the choir, I thought I'd go over the main differences between the UK system and other systems, and a little bit the European Parliament, where I've also worked, and then leave more time for questions. So as part of the UK's constitution, there is a formal opposition known as Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition. This opposition will shadow the government, and you will have a shadow minister for every minister in the government. The shadow is responsible for holding that government minister to account and scrutinising their decisions. There are, of course, minority parties as well, such as the Liberal Democrats, the DUP. However, these people have spokespeople on broader issues, such as foreign affairs, rather than individual shadow ministers. A shadow minister is legally allotted an individual amount of time to respond to a minister or to summon a minister to Parliament. That makes engaging them very useful for advocacy groups in a way that isn't common in many other systems. I work for something called an all-party parliamentary group. That is very similar to a committee. The major differences are that a all-party parliamentary group, or APPG, does not have the legal power to summon a minister or to compel testimony from anyone. A committee will have roughly 12 members. It will be comprised of both government and opposition, but in general, it will be comprised of predominantly the governing party. That is because in Britain, we don't have a separate executive and legislative branch in the way that many other countries do. Of course, we do. But the Prime Minister, the head of government, is always going to be the head of the major party. Now, that means in the UK, committees aren't always giving the government the same level of scrutiny that you'll find in other countries. As I've said, committees can compel evidence from people. That would mean that the sergeant at arms, a man in tights with an épée sword, if someone refused to give testimony before a committee, they would be held in contempt of Parliament, and the sergeant at arms would go out on the tube with his épée and bring this person to Parliament and hold them in the Tower. Big Ben is held captive and hold them there. Now that hasn't happened in a very, very long time. So in practice, that doesn't happen, and so what APPGs function as are smaller committees. They can't compel evidence, but realistically, in my experience, no one has ever refused to attend an APPG meeting at their request. Now, an all-party parliamentary group contains members of both houses usually, as both Commons and Lords. Where there is a Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Commons and an International Relations and Defence Committee in the House of Lords, there are also these all-party parliamentary groups, which are comprised of both members of the governing party and members of the opposition, and usually members of minority parties as well. But there is only ever one APPG. An APPG therefore speaks on behalf of Parliament, united across both houses and all parties when they do so. So an APPG report, for example, would carry the portcullis logo of UK Parliament, and it would speak neutrally, apolitically on any given subject. APPGs don't have the same funding that a committee has. Often positions such as my own are funded by someone like Eritrea Focus. So often they don't have the same level of resources as a committee would to have broad level inquiries, but they are much more focused. So instead of having the International Relations and Defence Committee, you have a parliamentary group on one small area, and that APPG can drive parliamentary activity, debates, parliamentary questions, statements and events on one small issue. Now that being said, members of the APPG do also tend to be members of those committees. The chair of the APPG for Eritrea, Kate Ossamore, is also a member of the International Development Committee. The chair of the International Relations and Defence Committee, the Lords Foreign Affairs Committee, is also a vice chair, as is the vice chair of the International Relations and Defence Committee, Lord Alton. And it's not always too important to stress with which hat they are speaking. If the chair of the International Relations and Defence Committee comes out and says, we should not be funding projects in Eritrea with forced labour, now she can do that as the chair of the International Relations Committee, or she can do that as the vice chair of the APPG on Eritrea. It isn't too important with what hat she's doing that. Another major difference between the UK system and many other systems is that in the UK, ministers are always, or almost always, MPs. They're not an MP, they will be a member of the House of Lords. That means, as we have now, that several former ministers for Africa, or several former Foreign Office ministers, have now, what we say, come back to the back benches. So they are now re-engaging in Parliament in a lesser role, but that means they're more publicly involved, they're not running a public department, and they carry the weight of being a former minister. And of course, a very recent minister. The APPG for Eritrea has 2 people who were former Foreign Office ministers in the last 2 or 3 years. So their voice carries a lot of weight within the civil service. It should also be noted that in the UK, you do often get a double salary for some jobs. You will get your MP's salary, and then you will also get your ministerial salary or your salary as a chair of a committee. Now, sadly, if you're the chair of an APPG, you don't get a second salary for that. That is something you do out of the goodness of your own heart to build your profile. But that, of course, gives it a secondary status compared to ministerial positions. My notes there. So a few words then on the European Parliament and more generally the role of parliaments in general in foreign affairs. Now, the EU Parliament, and to an extent the UK Parliament, has always played a bigger role in foreign affairs than most legislatures. As many of you may have seen, a European Parliament Development Committee recently had a meeting with the European Commission, and in that meeting, the European Commission made very clear that due to opposition in the European Parliament, the Commission would no longer be funding any road building project. Right. That was notable. It's not often that you will see a civil service department of any country saying that because of opposition in a parliament, we are going to abandon a policy. Now, often you could say that that is because the legislature is often filled with the opposition, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whoever it is, will be controlled by the government. So the government isn't going to just do what the opposition says. Now, foreign affairs historically has always been sort of the playground of monarchs, and then the modern executive has really inherited this responsibility. You don't really see the French president consulting the Senate on what to do on French foreign affairs. However, the European Union is largely seen as an incredibly undemocratic organization, and its parliament is really seen as a pretty toothless and symbolic body. Yet unusually, European bureaucrats are much more responsive to the European Parliament than most governments are to their parliaments. Now, in my experience, civil service in Brussels don't feel they have the same authority as if they were governing on behalf of an elected government. And because of that, they're much more responsive to criticism from the European Parliament than many governments are. Of course, the European Parliament is the only really democratic body within the European Union. Now, it's entirely possible many people would disagree with me on why the European Commission consults the European Parliament in the way it does, but that's my opinion on why the European Parliament plays such an oversized role in foreign affairs compared to, say, the French or Irish parliaments. As a side note on that, the UK House of Commons has played an increasing role in foreign affairs over recent years, and that's been ever since Tony Blair set precedent by holding a vote in the House of Commons on whether or not Britain should go to war with Iraq. From that point on, it's been very difficult for any Prime Minister to take a decision, a major foreign affairs decision, without consulting Parliament. Now, as I've said before, I don't really want to preach to the choir. I have more that I could say about general advocacy and what I've seen in my experience from working UK, EU parliaments, and from lobbying the Knesset in Israel when I worked for Amnesty. But I'm also open to leaving that to questions rather than sort of lecturing people on something they already know a lot about. So perhaps I'll leave that there, and we'll come back to that later if people feel they have questions. Update?
Jack, that's extremely helpful. Thanks very much. Much appreciated. I'll start by saying a few words about Eritrean Diaspora in the UK and Eritrea Focus before moving on to some specific issues involving some of the technical legal issues we are progressing in the UK, and then concluding with the legal challenge being mounted against the European Union by a foundation of Eritreans in the Netherlands. Now, according to the Home Office, around 150,000 Eritreans have made the UK their home. Around 3/4 of those have arrived since the independence of Eritrea from Ethiopia. Almost half of the Eritrean diaspora live in London and the southeast of England. A large number of Eritrean diaspora in the UK are very successful in academia, in business, and as employees in both the private and not-for-profit sector. Some indeed hold high-level executive roles. However, unlike in the United States and in one or two other European countries, no one, it seems, of Eritrean extraction appears so far to be involved in any shape or form in UK politics, be it at local council level or as a member of parliament. This is truly unfortunate, given the caliber of Eritrean diasporas in the UK. To address this lack of political engagement in the UK, Eritrea Focus will work proactively with the ACL movement to organize, train, and provide them a platform of engagement with local politicians as well as members of parliament in the months to come. And we hope our desired objective will be achieved. Let me now move on to Eritrea Focus and its engagement work. Eritrea Focus is a small and fairly new organization with limited running cost budget. As such, and in order to achieve our stated aim of exposing human rights abuses in Eritrea, we closely work with other organizations. To this end, we proactively is the word I want to underline, reach out to other organizations here in the UK and overseas, and have as a result established a network of partner organizations, including in specialist areas such as the extractive sector, lawyers that focus on forced labor, and the anti-slavery movement, especially in the United States. I think it's worth emphasizing that Eritrea Focus is a non-political organization that is open and willing to work with all like-minded individuals and organizations, regardless of their past political affiliation, faith, ethnicity, religion, age, or gender. Now, let me move on to some of the litigation aspects of our work that have taken place over the last year or so, maybe 2 years. There are two areas in the UK. The first one involves actions against PFDJ individuals who carry out unwarranted attack on members of the diaspora or their friends. You recall perhaps reading in November 2018, a physical attack was made on Martin Platt, a dear friend of mine, a lifelong supporter of the Eritrean people's right for justice and peace. We stood rightly, in my view, alongside our friend throughout the case, and we were able to secure conviction and that the attacker was fined and received a custodial sentence, albeit suspended. Similarly, in November 2018, the same PFDJ attacker assaulted Emmanuel Iyasu, the founder of Asena Foundation and its chief executive. Again, we stood by Emmanuel, secured a prominent law firm to bring a conviction. The attacker was electronically tagged for a period where the police were monitoring his movement. In court, he received a fine and a suspended custodial sentence. The individual has since returned to Eritrea. Second, a case involving Eritrea Focus against the UK government, or to be specific, the Department for International Development, DFID, as we call it here in the UK. You will have seen from our press release in early May, Eritrea Focus instructed Duncan Lewis, public team, to launch a legal challenge against the UK government's funding to the EU Trust Fund for Africa. The funding involves a road rehabilitation project connecting the port of Massawa in Eritrea to the border with Ethiopia. The project uses from the Eritrean National Service, workers from the Eritrean National Service, who according to the UN work in slave-like conditions, and condemns it as crimes against humanity. Since the start of the case in May, there has been a lot of work that's been going on behind the scene by our lawyers. A request for information was sought from the UK government under the Freedom of Information Act, and that information has been received. Our lawyers have started to draft a pre-action letter based on what the government's response is going to be to the final information request that they will have to put before them before the case proceeds to the courts. We have now appointed a junior counsel, Eleanor Mitchell, who has looked at the draft pre-action letter. We have also appointed a Queen's Counsel, a QC, by the name of Richard Herman, who looked at the pre-action draft letter only yesterday. We hope to receive the QC's comments later today, after which we will formally submit our case to the UK government, and hopefully by close tomorrow. The deadline for the government to respond will be 14 days. We would expect to get their response within 14 days, although legally they have the right to extend it to 21 days. During this period, our lawyers will finalize the legal arguments in the pre-action letter, which will be submitted to the courts, hopefully towards the tail end of July or the beginning of August. In preparing this legal challenge, Duncan Lewis are in contact with lawyers handling the Nefson case in Canada, the lawyers handling the legal action against the EU and the Netherlands, the UA Special Envoy to Eritrea. They are also carrying out various research of their own with the assistance of asylum seekers. Now, moving to the case involving the Foundation of Human Rights for Eritrea and the European Union. The Foundation of Human Rights for Eritrea and their lawyers, Kennedy van der Laan, launched a lawsuit against the EU for its funding of the road rehabilitation project, exactly the same project that our case involves, in April 2019. If you wish to look at the full submission, you can access it on the lawyer's website, the Kennedy van der Laan website, and there is an English translation of it. In summary, the EU announced the first phase of the road project of worth 20 million euros in the beginning of 2019. In their project scope, the EU freely admits that, among others, the national service labor would be used in the project. When the funding announcement was made, the foundation sent a letter to EU demanding for the funding to be cancelled, given the involvement of conscripts and forced labor, or else illegal action would follow. The foundation explained the use of forced labor would amount to slavery in violation of the most basic principles of international law. In spite of the foundation's letter, the EU did not halt its project and indeed added another 60 million euros for the second phase of the project. This was a trigger point for the lawyers to launch a case in the courts of Amsterdam, the Netherlands. The EU justifies its funding by saying the works will be monitored by UNDP, making sure successful implementation of the project. It further adds the EU is not responsible for the workforce and that the Eritrean government is. Their involvement, therefore, is in securing the necessary funding for the material and heavy equipment that is required for the road project. The foundation legal challenge was formally launched on the 13th of May 2020, when the letter of summons was sent to the EU. On 17th June, the documents were submitted to the Amsterdam courts. The case is apparently now awaiting a first follow-up from the courts and a written reply from the EU. On 15th June, the EU announced it will not fund any more road works to projects in Eritrea. Whether that is as a result of the pending case or not, it remains to be seen. But it is clear there has been an advocacy by several members of the European Parliament. However, it's added the EU will implement the current second phase of the project, as I said, worth 60 million euros, and the contract has been duly signed. At the same meeting on the 15th of June, the so-called self-reliant champion government of Eritrea asked for another 50 million euros for its road projects. The EU declined the request. Friends, as I come to a conclusion, you may ask why we got a lot of trouble and expenses to stop the flow of funds into Eritrea. Under normal circumstances, we would not do this. We'd actually champion for it, we'd work for it, proactively engage with financial institutions and governments to secure aid and revenue stream to come to our country for the benefit of our people. But we're not doing that. And there are three reasons for it. First, aid is not used for the purpose given. As you will have seen from the World Bank March 2020 report, most of the aid money allocated to Eritrea, in fact, goes to offshore bank accounts of PFDG members. It does not reach our people. It's not used for the development of our country. And so, why have it? Second, to highlight the suffering of the Eritrean people and the hands of the ruthless and merciless PFDJ. These legal actions bring to the fore the injustice and the slave-like conditions our people live in, the crime against humanity that this government is committing on its own people. Third, to stop the flow of aid and other revenue streams to Eritrea, so we effectively cripple the country's economy until such time the regime stops abusing our people. Friends, economic sanctions and boycotts worked in South Africa and helped to dismantle the apartheid regime for good. There is no reason to my mind why it cannot work in Eritrea. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jack and Hopti. That was terrific. And we'll come back to you when we have our group discussion. I think it's time now for Sigal and Gary to speak about what's happening in Israel.
1 second. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it was fascinating to hear Hapte talking about Eritreans not involved in politics, while in Israel we are trying just to have them just not cleaning and sweeping floors, but doing other kind of activities. But one day. Okay. So I will start. My name is Sigal Rosen, and I'm one of the founders of the Hotline for Refugees and Migrants. We established the hotline 22 years ago in order to safeguard the rights of refugees, migrant workers, and victims of human trafficking in Israel. Through client services, legal action, and policy initiative, we strive to create a just asylum system and the right-based approach to migration law and policy. Since 1998, hotline staff and volunteers entered the various immigration detention facilities in order to provide paralegal representation. Through our work in the detention facilities, we also encountered victims of human trafficking and asylum seekers. Today, it is our mission to assist vulnerable individuals to uphold their rights, particularly when they are held in immigration detention. By combining precedent-setting litigation, paralegal aid, policy initiatives, and public outreach, we achieve systematic changes to safeguard the rights of refugees and migrants in Israel. The hotline is the only Israeli organization with access to immigration detention centers and the primary organization safeguarding the rights of detainees and deportees. We work to ensure that those facing deportation understand their rights and that these rights are in line with international norms. In collaboration with other Israeli human rights organizations such as the Association for Civil Rights, Kav LaOved, Physician for Human Rights, ASAF, and the African Refugees Development Center, we work to eradicate conditions which lead to extreme vulnerability of refugees and migrants, such as government procedures curtailing employment and family rights, flawed refugee status determination procedures, and public hostility. Finally, we serve as a source of information for decision makers and the general public, enriching their knowledge of these issues. I would like to focus on our efforts to protect the rights of Eritrean asylum seekers. According to the Israeli Ministry of Interior, there are 22,000 Eritreans residing in Israel now. Despite the fact that they started entering the country already in 2006, and that almost all of them entered Israel before 2012, only 13 of them received refugee status so far, 13. Since 2006, when Eritrean asylum seekers arrived in Israel in growing numbers, the hotline invested considerable efforts in promoting their rights, getting them released from immigration detention, reducing their geographical restrictions, promoting the consideration of their asylum claim, and preventing decision makers' attempts to lock them once more in administrative detention for unlimited periods of time in order to encourage them to leave the country. During these last 2 decades, we changed our tactics and work methods in response to the changing circumstances and the political situation. The methods always included visits of asylum seekers and monitoring the situation in immigration detention centers, holding reception sessions for asylum seekers, and providing them with paralegal assistance, as well as submitting legal petitions to the various courts. In order to influence the Israeli decision maker, we use the following methods: the publication of personal testimonies of asylum seekers in the media in order to create an awareness to their plight, meeting with members of parliament and government officials and facilitating meetings of Eritrean asylum seekers with them, initiating parliamentary committee discussions on the issue of asylum seekers, providing the state controller with information regarding the lack of rights of asylum seekers, and publishing the state controller conclusions, conducting researches regarding the infractions of the law towards asylum seekers, writing reports about it and publishing them. The hotline major achievements in protecting the rights of Eritrean asylum seekers include, in 2006, spearheading significant changes to Israel's trafficking laws, culminating in the passing of the Fight Against Human Trafficking Act, which banned all forms of human trafficking, a change that allowed about 500 Eritrean asylum seekers to be recognized as trafficking in persons victims and benefit from the rights this status provides. In 2007, through litigation, we achieved the state-funded legal aid for victims of trafficking and unaccompanied minors. As I stated before, the hotline collaborates with other human rights organizations in Israel, and together we managed to achieve the following achievements. In 2011, a Supreme Court ruling that asylum seekers under group protection can be employed without fear that the law will be enforced on them or on their employers. In 2013, the High Court abrogated the third amendment to the anti-infiltration law, the law by which asylum seekers were held in administrative detention for at least 3 years for illegal entry into Israel. In 2014, the High Court abrogated the Fourth Amendment to the anti-infiltration law, the law by which asylum seekers could be held in indefinite detention in the Cholot open facility. In 2015, the High Court ruling on the Fifth Amendment to the anti-infiltration law restricted detention in the Cholot facility for a maximum period of 12 months. In 2018, preventing the indefinite administrative detention that could have led to coerced deportation of Sudanese and Eritrean asylum seekers to the third countries, Rwanda and Uganda. And in 2020, this year, the High Court overturned a significant portion of the deposit law. According to the decision, the main portion of the law, which required that 20% of the salaries of the asylum seekers will be deducted into a special deposit account, which could only be accessed upon departing Israel or obtaining official refugee status, which hardly ever happened, was deemed to be an unconstitutional violation of the asylum seeker's right. The court required that the government to return all funds withheld under this portion of the law. And during these last difficult months of the pandemic, more than 200 million shekels were returned already to Eritreans and Sudanese. A new government was formed lately in Israel after more than a year of political uncertainty, and this new government offers both challenges and opportunities in our field of action. We already heard immigration experts predict that the COVID-19 pandemic might cause hosting countries to adopt more strict policy towards asylum seekers. In order to better cope with the changing policies and continue safeguarding the rights of refugees in our hosting countries, we human rights activists should join forces and share our knowledge and experience on a regular basis. Conference like this is a great opportunity to do so, so I would like to end by thanking you for arranging this conference. Thank you so much.
Okay. Did you hear me?
I think you can be heard.
Yes,
We can hear.
yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. First of all,
Please.
I would like to thank you for giving us this opportunity. We are working together with Segal in the hotline. First of all, this conference, it gives me a big opportunity to share my experience with Eritrean friends, also beautiful and amazing Eritreans from all kind of background, also all kind of profession. And also it gives me another good opportunity to be with my classmates, Dr. Samsom. We were together in University of Asmara. So I'm happy to be here. My name is Gabriel Meles. I'm here in Israel almost for 13 years. Today I want to share with you about two topics. One, the Eritrean in Israel, our contribution, in the struggle for making the Eritrea democratic. Also, our struggles also for our rights as refugees in Israel. Okay. I represent the Eritrean refugees who are living in Israel with uncertainty. Despite our uncertain situation, we still constantly think about our beloved country, Eritrea. I would like to start with our struggle for democratic Eritrea, since this is the most important of my two topics. It can make the struggle for refugee rights redundant. Allow me to share some of my experience with our political work in Israel to promote democracy in Eritrea. Some of the steps that we are taking, first we managed to control and overcome our fears. In 2007, I was one of the Eritreans enter Israel. At this time, the Israelis were calling all the African refugees, Darfurs. There were two reasons for that. One, the Darfur genocide was hot in the media, and everyone know about it. The second reason was that we Eritreans, we were afraid of exposure to the media, so there was no awareness in the Israeli public to our plight. In order to change this situation, back in 2007, we established a leadership structure to advocate for Eritrean refugee rights. In a short period of time, we made a big influence in the public and with the Israeli authorities. So cooperation with local human rights organizations and providing interviews and information about the human rights violation in Eritrea to the Israeli media. As a result of our action, the Israeli authorities grant all the Eritreans who resided in Israel by the end of 2007 legal work permit, which means I'm talking before the people who come to Israel before the end of 2008. But after that, the condition was changed. Many Eritreans were starting to enter Israel, and the kind of visa also changed. They start to give the conditional visa, which the status of the visa is lower than the work permit. And the holder of the work permit at this time, I'm one of them, are very few people. Also, it does not mean that we are also recognized like refugees. After that, we felt a bit more secure in Israel. We slowly start to join the existing political organization and parties of Eritreans in diaspora. We also established a political movement in Israel. Over the last decades, every year we conduct large demonstration in front of Eritrean embassy, demanding that the dictator step down so that we can finally go home to our beloved countries. The photos and videos of this impressive demonstration, we believe, inspire the Eritreans all over the world, to come out and also to protest against the Eritreans. When I explain about this, when I talk about this, we know that the old veterans were demonstrating in front of the embassies, but especially this was inspiring, for the Eritreans who were running away from Eritrea, from the dictatorship, after 2001. Our public participation in Israel Parliament hearing regarding our status, especially the hearing attended by the Eritrean ambassador Takastet Somariam, were very influential. the video that was being recorded, also been broadcasted in Al Jazeera. I think most of you you saw it. And it's one of the direct confrontation with the representative of the regime, outside from the refugees. And in this video, when all the Eritreans all over the world, they saw it, it was been inspiring. And it was we believe that it was also influencing many Eritreans. That after that, we saw in England, in Italy, in Sweden, Eritreans enter to the office of the ambassadors and challenging directly. So we believe that we had also a good influence on that. Not only this, also the Eritrean refugees living in Israel. Also, we are not only demonstrating, also standing up for the regime in Israel. We saw also many young Eritreans, they just leave everything, their personal interests, their personal benefits. They took all the risk by leaving Israel, going Uganda, and went to Ethiopia. Just they showed the courage, no matter what was the result at this time. They showed the courage and went to the border very close to Eritrea in order to challenge the regime by itself. This is one of the amazing thing that we saw in these 10 years in Israel. I will add this as in my recommendation, but the second step that we did to struggle in Israel also for the refugee rights. The Eritrean leadership play an important role in promoting the rights of refugees in Israel. Over the years, we conduct demonstrations against the anti-infiltration law, against the condition of Holot detention facility, against the plan to coerce refugees to live for Uganda, Rwanda, again, and also against the deposit law that took 36% of our salary. Many of us provided interviews in the media about this action of the Israeli government and participate in parliament hearing to promote our rights. Eritrean in Israel also work hand in hand with local organization with local human rights organization, understanding that together we have a better chance to succeed. The last also, which is a very important thing that I want to share with you also, the Eritrean living in Israel that we did is especially during the pandemic of coronavirus. We saw that from our study, also from our understanding, when the Israeli government decided to close the country, 90% of our people will lose their job and will be in a big trouble, in a big problem. Besides that, also we are not we are not getting, will not get any benefit from the Israeli government. When the Israeli government make a decision to subsidize for the citizens, we are not benefiting for that. So all of the people in the leadership, in the people who are active in the political activity, also people also individually, they are active in the media, in the social work. We come together, we establish a task force, and we say we need to stand for our people in this dark time in order to assist. The first thing that we come to the agreement is we now, our people are in a very difficult situation, no matter what their political philosophy, no matter what their religion, no matter where they come from, their ethnicity, all the Eritreans in Israel in a very big problem, and we decide to serve everybody together to create this in order to help the people. First, we established the task force with the leadership, and then when we established this task force, we create 3 departments. One is working in the media. To create this department, we invited all the Eritreans in Israel who are active in social media to bring them together, rather than the community getting this informed information. We make them to work together, and we create also a team that can translate everything that comes from the government, from the Ministry of Health, and also from the immigration authority, and we provide our community like the best information in one line, in one Facebook page, so that like the community will not be like in panic, will not be like disinformed. The other department that we create also, like we create like a public department that can work with the media, can work with the human rights organization, can participate also in a governmental meeting in order to raise the concern of our community. The another department that we create also like the food distribution department. This is one of the best thing that we did. We were assisted about 500 single mothers, people who have health problems, also family with, even if like there was husband and wife, but one of them like they might have like health problem. So we were helping about 500 families all over, living all over the Israels, with the food and with the money for the rent, especially for the people who are being desperate for food and also for money for this, for the rent. If you tell me like what we learned from this, we approach the community as a whole, as Eritreans, as a one Eritreans. But before that, all the people who were being in the task force were being like blackmailing by the regime supporters, also by the embassy like staffs, like as Weyane people recruited by Weyane, as Ethiopian, as nationalistic, many kind of the name that you know. But when we approach our people, like in a very critical time, when we start to feed them, like most of the people also we found from the people who have a connection with the regime, then because their mind was filled with all negative information about us, and then when they see the reality, how we were calling these people like Weyane or Ethiopian, now they are coming to our help. This is one of the like very big success that we saw, and I want to use this also as a recommendation, like for this kind of conference, also for the focus of Eritrean Focus. In our like now the situation, the political situation in Eritrea is like very fertile for change, and we saw like the regime himself, the one who was creating the confusion, the division, or the mistrust in all our struggle for independence. He was dancing in Ethiopia, he was being excited, he was being like showing us his true picture, so that we need the people in diaspora. We have like freedom, we have like all the access. We need to create such kind of environment for reconciliation. For example, like our armed struggles was the tension between the ALF and the ALF, like the mistrust between our veterans, is affecting for us not to be united. The mistrust between the veterans and the young generation is affecting us not to solve the problem. So I want this kind of conference to create an environment to bring all the Eritreans from all kind of stakeholders, from the political parties, from the media, from the academia people, from the human rights organization, to come together, to work together in order like to minimize the gap and then to answer the demand of our people inside Eritrea. Thank you very much. This is like what I was prepared, and I'm very happy like we have an opportunity with you, with all the amazing people that I know. I was working together with Sigal, with Job Stepper, and I know all the people, like amazing people like Dr. Araya, Dr. Gabre, Ato Hafte, like in the media. No, even though I didn't know you like personally. Dr. Gabre, the amazing interview that you make with Dr. Amaniel in Asena. We need this. Our people need us, like we are like psychologically being tortured. We have capacity for our people to help like you know, in their psychological trauma, in their one of my experience that I want to share with you from the Israeli organization. They are working together to fight the Israeli government on the Supreme Court together. But all the organization, for example, the organization which I work is working on the legal issue, but there are organizations working on medical issue, organization working on social issue. We have enough capacity, like from Eritrean educated people in outside of Eritrea who can give all the service. Please be together, be united, and we will solve our problem. And finally, I want to close by the slogans that I know when I come to Israel. When the Jewish before independence, they say next year in Jerusalem. Try to conclude my message also. I hope we'll do this next year in Asmara. Thank you very much.
Well done.